From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, the spirit world. Here's what's happening. Tragedy in Utah. 8 family members, including 5 children, found dead in a southern Utah home, killed by their father. Officials in the city of Enoch said that Michael Haight, 42 years old, took his own life after killing his wife, mother-in-law, and the couple's 5 children. Children ranged in age from 4 to 17, including 3 girls, 2 boys. Enoch, small town of about 8,000 people. My God. Ukraine said no to an announcement by Russian President Vladimir Putin of a 36-hour ceasefire to mark Orthodox Christmas, saying there would be no truce until Russia withdraws its invading forces from occupied land. The Kremlin said Putin had ordered a ceasefire from the midday on Friday after a call for a Christmas truce from the Patriarch of Moscow, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Vladimir Putin apparently is terminally ill with cancer and will die soon, according to Ukraine's military intelligence head. His name is Krylo Budanov. Without providing evidence, he has none, said he knows the Russian leader's death is imminent due to an ongoing illness with cancer. And again, he has provided no evidence. China defended its handling of its raging COVID-19 outbreak after U.S. President Joe Biden voiced concern, and the World Health Organization said Beijing was underreporting virus deaths. Meanwhile, here we go again. A new XBB.1. Variant of COVID is the most transmittable yet detected, according to a senior World Health Organization official. The variant, which is a subvariant of Omicron, is confirming to be spread in 25 countries, including the United Kingdom and the U.S. Investigative reporter Christian Wild with us. Do I have to say, here we go again, Christian?
Yeah, there is no end. Now, being that this virus initially came to us from China, let's look at the risks they are finding in their own country before it makes its way to us here in America. A couple of weeks ago, George, I was reading a report of passengers on a plane leaving Hong Kong who were tested for the virus before departure. And then they were tested again when the plane landed several hours later. The number of new viral cases for COVID had increased 50%. Does that give us an idea of how vulnerable the risk is that we're dealing with, and why even casual exposure is not to be taken lightly by any of us? The virus is now becoming prominent in countries all over the world, including the UK, as you just mentioned. And yes, we can get the virus and its variants 2, 3, and even more times. And what you share with us tonight, George, indicates that the newest variant is particularly more easily transmissible. And for many of us who have been fortunate to not have gotten the virus so far, with this new variant, it still puts us at a higher risk. When we consider the latest statistics, we might agree this is not to be taken lightly. No, not lightly when the actual case numbers as of today, George, according to the World Health Organization, 665 million cases worldwide and 7 million actual deaths. It is to be taken seriously. George, a handful more studies have continued to explore and report on how the antiviral properties of turmeric in general, not just mine, are proving helpful in protecting against this virus.
Does this mean more masks and we're going back to the old days?
It looks like we are, like it or not.
All right, my friend. Christian Weil's website, myheartbook.com. Amazon.com is laying off more than 18,000 employees, the biggest reduction in its history, and the latest sign that a tech industry slump is deepening. The chief executive officer out there announced the cuts. Not good news at all. Kevin Randle's with us with his weekly UFO report, and he'll be with us for the next 2 hours talking about some UFO breaking stories. Kevin, what do you got for us this week?
Well, good evening, George.
Hi there, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. And I always like to say hi when we begin these things.
Well, that's good.
Well, for decades, I have suggested that the report of another bright light crossing the night sky is not going to add anything to our body of knowledge about UFOs. Without other witnesses, and without corroborating evidence, there isn't much we can do with such a case, not to mention that a light can be any number of mundane and terrestrial things. If there's another chain of evidence, such as an independent recordings of anomalies, then the case takes on added importance. If radar is involved or if there are photographs, there is something to provide additional clues to the identity of the craft or the object. This is where MADAR comes in, because it is a system that detects these anomalies, some that are well associated with UFO sightings. On May 2nd of last year, a female witness saw a couple of bright red floodlights above a tree line. She asked her boyfriend if he saw the lights, and he took a quick look. The UFO was described as a matte black, large, futuristic-looking aircraft. It was moving so slowly that it seemed to be almost hovering. The Thompson station at Node 33 in Tennessee, about 60 miles from the sighting, showed the sighting from about 5 minutes before to 5 minutes after the event. There was multi-sensor variance, including a compass deviation suggesting a strong electromagnetic field. On July 22nd of 2022 in McKinney, Texas, the witnesses were traveling from Allen, Texas to their home when one of the daughters saw a gray, solid-looking cigar-shaped object heading to the north. There were 10 points along the side in a row that were emitting light. The 17-year-old daughter tried to get her camera working as they raced north looking for a place to get off the highway. They stopped the car, leaped out, but the UFO was gone. They didn't see it accelerate or vanish. It was just gone. The MADAR site at Wiley, Texas, only 17 miles away, recorded several anomalies at the time of the sighting. There was a compass deviation, which I mentioned because of the EM effect. There were other readings as well, but that moves into a somewhat technical aspect of the case. The sighting is part of the MUFON case management system as well. Finally, on May 15th of last year in Oregon City, Oregon, an older couple was closing up the house when the wife saw a strange object to the south. She called her husband, and then both went to get their glasses. The UFO paused over a high-voltage power line and then moved toward the witnesses. The UFO was round and had a bright, fiery red-orange color. They also saw a triangular pattern of lights on the object. The UFO was about 100 feet above the ground, and it made no noise. The witness made a point that they lived in a somewhat rural environment so that they wouldn't have heard any sound from the UFO, and the sighting lasted 2 to 3 minutes. The MADAR site, which was only 13 miles from the sighting location, registered the anomalies at the same time as the sighting. The witnesses were interviewed and provided additional information. Given the length of the sighting, the spikes in the data at the exact time of the sighting, this is a compelling case. And that does it for tonight, George.
All right, just hang by because you're going to be our guest for the next couple hours, Kevin, as we talk about the government and UFOs next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Lots of things happening in the year 2022 with UFOs, but what about 2023? What will it fare? Kevin Randle with us has more than 45 years' experience studying the UFO phenomenon in all various incarnations. His training by the Army and the Air Force provides him with a keen insight into the operations and protocols of the military, their investigations into UFOs and into a phenomenon that has puzzled people for more than a century. He appears weekly on our program with updates on UFO activity, and his latest book is called Understanding Roswell, which we'll talk about as well. Kevin, welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I talked to you, George.
Do you think 2023 is going to be a breakthrough for us in the field of ufology?
I would like to say yes. I would like to be positive, but given the history of the UFO phenomenon, I think that we're going to just see the same things we've seen for the last 75 years. I call it Twining 2.0. General Twining was the officer at the Air Materiel Command in 1947 when the first sightings were seen here in the United States. And he wanted to establish a priority project with an investigation into what was going on because they really didn't know. And it was supposed to be transparent, but it was a classified project. They said the name was Project Saucer. It was really Project Sign and that sort of thing. We move now into this environment. We're in the same point we were at that time. The government, the military, the Congress seems to be interested in UFOs, and yet we seem to see the same sort of dodges that we saw back then. They promised a lot of things, and then the road sort of shifts, and we don't get the information we need. So I think that's where we're going to stay in 2023. We're not going to see a lot of progress.
Kevin, with the late Stanton Friedman gone now, I really believe this has pushed you way to the forefront of the Roswell case. You were tops anyway, but this you're almost standing alone out there. What do you think happened in July of 1947?
I lean toward the extraterrestrial. I think when we peel away all the nonsense that is surfaced about it, and there's been a lot, and I've contributed some of it myself, simply because you interview people, you think they're telling you the truth. You learn later that they're not really as honest as you would hope to have been. But when we boil it down to the basics, there are just some things that are inexplicable. We have no terrestrial explanation for what fell at Roswell. The Air Force explanation of Project Mogul simply doesn't work. And what I do not understand is the skeptical community is supposed to be questioning everything. If you have a good sighting, they question the research, they question the methodology, they question the evidence. When you move to the other side of the coin, when you have an explanation, they don't question it. Project Mogul, which is the balloon arrays that were supposedly launched in New Mexico in 1947 that caused the debris field, when you look at the documentation, it says there was no flight number 4. It never flew. It didn't go, so it couldn't have dropped the debris. And yet they never question that. They accept that as legitimate. So I look at the case and I say I have seen no terrestrial explanation that explains all the information that we've gathered about the Roswell case. There's just something missing from that. There may be some kind of classified project we don't know about, but I can't imagine what it would be after 50 years that would harm national security if they announced it. One of the logical things was the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell, New Mexico, was the only atomic strike force in the world at the time. Now, according to the information I've been able to find, and this came from Jesse Marcel Jr. and other people, the atomic bomb at that time, the size and shape, the look of it was classified. And so had they inadvertently dropped a mock-up as they were practicing with the atomic bombs because they were huge, that would have been something to cover up in 1947. But in today's environment, who cares? If they don't look like that anymore, the information that you would gather by seeing it would be of no use to anybody. And we actually have reports of them dropping actual atomic bombs on places. I think they dropped one in Albuquerque in 1957, and we know about that stuff. So we have no explanation, a terrestrial explanation that has been offered that I find reasonable to explain the Roswell case, and that kind of shifts us into the extraterrestrial.
Are we still waiting for reports from NASA to Congress, or did we get everything we were expecting?
We're not getting much of anything.
I didn't think so.
Remember, they were supposed to produce a big report in June of 2021, June 25th of 2021. It was like 9 pages, and it was just absolutely useless. And then he said, well, we're going to update it in 90 days, but they never did. And then we move into 2022, and they're supposed to be doing this, that, and the other thing. And we get in May, we get that briefing at the Pentagon. And like many others, I signed on and watched the whole 80 minutes of the briefing. And they really, the two people being interviewed didn't seem to know much about UFOs. The congressmen and women who were interviewing them seemed to know more about UFOs than they did. And we're supposed to be getting more information, but it just never seems to come. I did a book called UFOs in the Deep State, and I tried to explain how you can get an order from the government, the president, for example, and not respond to it. And what you can do is just delay it by saying, there's a lot of pieces to this thing. We've got to pull them all together. Let's get a comprehensive report to you, and we will get it to you in X number of weeks. And somehow it just never gets done. And the next thing you know, the guy who was asking for that, he's now out of the government, and somebody else moves in. So there's always all kinds of ways to dodge the questions and delay the information. And that's what we're seeing today. We're supposed to get this information, but it didn't show up. We're supposed to get this information, but it didn't show up. We're in that point where there just simply is nothing being forwarded to us as it's of any benefit to us.
Kevin, did you know the late Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell?
I had met him once or twice. I didn't really know him on a personal level, but yes, I had an opportunity to meet with him, sure.
I knew him well, and he has told me he under any circumstances over the years before he passed away, that we were being visited by intelligent extraterrestrials. And he admitted, he said, George, I never saw anything going to the moon or anything like that. I didn't see anything on the moon, but I've been told by people in government that I trust that we are being and have been visited. And I believe the guy.
There's no reason to not believe him. The thing is, I worked with top secret material when I was an Air Force officer and an Army officer. I worked with that, and I understand how these things work, and I understand how if you don't have a need to know, you're not supposed to share it with other people and that sort of thing. But there also comes a point where you're dealing with professionals at the highest levels, and they do tend to share a little bit of information, even though they know they're not supposed to do that. If you ask a direct question, I think Barry Goldwater was a good example of that. He had some inside information, and he asked LeMay, General LeMay, to see the Blue Room that's alleged at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they kept this extraterrestrial material. And I've actually got a letter from Goldwater explaining that it was the only time that LeMay ever got mad at him, and told him not only no, but hell no, and never ask me again, or I'll have you court-martialed. So there is some secret going on there that is at the highest levels classified, and there's very little talk about it outside the core of the people you know. So I have no doubt that people that Edgar Mitchell knew would have shared information with him if he asked the questions, thinking, here's a guy we can trust with that information.
Kevin, what got you involved in all of this?
I always blame my mother.
Blame it on Mom, huh?
Yeah. She was a science fiction fan, and she read science fiction books which deal with alien civilizations and interstellar flight and all of that sort of thing. In fact, she took me a movie when I was a little kid, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and that kind of sparked my interest. And so it kind of grew out of there, and from that point on, I would read the books about UFOs from the people that you know, I'm sure you know, like of course, Brad Steiger.
Sure.
Who became a very good friend, by the way.
We miss him, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Frank Edwards' books. Frank, I think, wrote more from memory than he did from notes, so he oftentimes got things wrong. The report he did on the Roswell case in Flying Saucer Serious Business, it's just like a page, half a page. He gets virtually everything wrong, other than there was a rancher involved in it. It was something that fell in Roswell, New Mexico, and the Air Force explained it as some kind of balloon with a device hanging from it. But he got most of the facts wrong. But the real point is, he was talking about Roswell back in 1965, 1966. And so, I mean, that all kind of sparked my interest in UFOs, and I, of course, became a science fiction fan as well, so it's sort of a double whammy there.
Kevin Randle with us. We'll take calls with Kevin next hour about UFOs and ufology. Jump on board. Kevin, it seems like things have changed dramatically over the years. We used to have a lot of abduction cases. We used to have a lot of reports of landing pod evidence, burned out spots and stuff. We don't get those anymore. How come?
Carl Flock and I used to talk about that before he passed away, and it was always it seemed like the UFOs had come, gathered the information that they wanted. They picked up samples of the flora and the fauna, and then they took it back to their home world so they could study it at length. Not unlike what we would do in some environmental studies that we do. And that might explain part of it. But we also had noticed that tendency that we don't have the same kind of robust cases that we used to have. Kathleen Martin just announced that she was no longer associating with ufology, but had taken her research in a different direction. I've had some correspondence with her about her moving into other arenas. And the other thing that strikes me about the abduction phenomenon, if it was as widespread as it was reported, it would seem to me that there would be a lot more UFO sightings going on as well. And I think we didn't see that sort of thing, and the logistics kind of get in the way. So it makes you wonder, is there some kind of interdimensional phenomena going on that accounts for some of this stuff.
Well, Jacques Vallée would believe. Kevin, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and chat more about this incredible story of ufology. Calls with Kevin Randle next hour. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with Kevin Randle. As I mentioned, we will take calls with Kevin next hour here on Coast to Coast. Kevin, I had a guest a few weeks ago, Cyrus Parsa, who was convinced there was an alien abduction plan underfoot by the ETs, but it's to create a hybridization program and get rid of all of us and move them in. What do you think of that?
I think, didn't David Jacobs do a book called The Thread a number of years ago that had a similar premise?
Same kind of premise, that's right.
I'm a little skeptical of that sort of thing, simply because we don't have a lot of evidence. We have evidence about alien abduction, of course. I think one of the strongest cases is the Hickson Parker abduction from Pascagoula in 1973. There was something that John Mack said a number of years ago, which he found it interesting that there seemed to be a matching between the researcher and the abductee. In other words, if you had cold calculating aliens, then they seemed to end up with Bud Hopkins. And if you had aliens with an Eastern philosophy, you ended up with John Mack. And if you were talking about the hybrids, and they ended up with David Jacobs. And so there might be something in there that hints at what we're talking about here, hinting about it going in that direction. But I think I don't think David Jacobs ever suggested, or maybe he did, that they were going to replace us with a hybrid. But they were developing the hybrids, and they would move among us, I guess, to kind of direct the way we were going and the things that we were doing, so that the planet would be more conducive to their way of life than it would be to ours, which, of course, then would move us out of that arena, out of the world arena.
And he has said, though, that he believes that it's a very nefarious purpose, that they're out to no good.
And I think that I think that John Mack's philosophy was that they were more benevolent than no good, and I think Bud Hopkins saw them more as being scientifically oriented, gathering their information without concerns with the traumatic effects on the abductees. And then David Jacobs would be of that philosophy. So, I mean, you can kind of pick and choose where you go with this thing. The problem is we're dealing with an alien species, and it's kind of hard to figure out where they might be going. We talk about the vast interstellar distances and how the speed of light limits our ability to move among the planets. But we, I guess you might say, are sort of a short-lived species. But what if we lived for like 1,000 years or 5,000 years? Then getting on a ship that would take 300 years to get to the next star system wouldn't be that outrageous to us, because we have that kind of a lifespan. So there's all kinds of things that we don't know. We're dealing with limited information. I know when you talk to the abductees, they say, well, I've been told this or I've been told that, but I can't release it to you. I've got to keep it under wraps. Or they could be lying to us as well. We just don't have enough information to make any kind of really intelligent responses about what their motive might be.
What do you think of the work of the late Zecharia Sitchin, who believes that a ET race called the Anunnaki came to good old planet Earth because they needed gold to sprinkle in their atmosphere to save their planet, and they created a hybrid, us, as workers, and here we started. What do you think of that? I've met Zecharia Sitchin, or I met Zecharia Sitchin a number of years ago, and we talked about some of these. My background in college, my undergraduate work was done in anthropology and archaeology. So I had an opportunity to look at some of this stuff, the information coming out of the scientific community. And again, we have to be careful with the scientific community, because sometimes they get so locked into their points of view that they're not going to look at anything, no matter how benign it might be, especially when you get radical like that. But I try to look at all this stuff with an open mind and look at that. I wonder about the manipulation of our DNA and that sort of thing for those purposes. I mean, I don't see any reason why
if there were alien species coming to Earth, why would they have to take the gold from Earth? Wouldn't it be easier to get it from the Oort cloud or the Kuiper belt, rather than having to come this deeply into the solar system? So I look at those sorts of things and ask those questions. There may be other factors involved that I'm not aware of that would require them to do that, but I look at that with a little bit of a skeptical eye, simply because I would like to see additional evidence. But I think that's kind of a scientific way to approach it. I'm not going to reject something out of hand because it doesn't fit with my view of the universe at this moment. There may be something that I learn later on that suggests, well, maybe that really is the way things were going. There are areas of our prehistory that we don't understand how things evolved in it, and it's being changed almost on a daily basis as anthropology and archaeology and paleontology all come to gathering additional information and changing our outlook of the world. And the best example I can think of is, well, the dinosaurs went extinct, and we now know, well, they really didn't. The theropods changed into birds, basically.
Yeah.
We have dinosaurs today. We just they don't look like we expected them to look like. So, we just have to look at the way science is changing and where things are being discovered that take us in different arenas.
Kevin, since 1947, what percent of U.S. presidents do you believe have been informed, advised about the UFO situation?
Well, I think that when you look at it, Harry Truman had to know, because he was the president at the time of the Roswell crash. Dwight Eisenhower had to know, because he was the chief of staff at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I should say, in 1947, and the information would have gone up through the chain of command through his office, so he would have known. When we get to John Kennedy, I don't see any need to tell the president about the UFOs unless something spectacular happened. And Kennedy had nothing during his administration that would have required him to have knowledge of UFOs, and the same thing with Lyndon Johnson. But you can take a look at some of the things that have gone on since then, and they might have had to brief certain presidents about it. I don't think they briefed him if they didn't have to, and if the president didn't ask questions. Jimmy Carter asked questions, and that was kind of what I was alluding to before, with him wanting to know what was going on with the UFOs, and he asked his director of Central Intelligence. Well, Carter was still president-elect. He asked the director of Central Intelligence, who happened to be George H.W. Bush, about UFOs. And Bush said to him, and I outlined all this in UFOs in the Deep State, that he wanted to remain on as the director of Central Intelligence. And Carter said, well, I'm having my own guy come in.
Uh-huh.
And then Bush said, well, you aren't the president yet. You don't have a need to know.
How about that?
And he could get away with that because what's Carter going to do? He couldn't fire him because he wasn't president yet, and when he came in, he was going to get fired anyway. So
and he was too honest. Or else he could have said, "You're going to be my man when I get in."
Yeah. But that kind of led to the idea that if Jimmy Carter asked the questions, and of course he got distracted with the hostage situation in Iran and that sort of thing. But if he asked the questions, I can see the director of Central Intelligence or the people who are in charge of the deep state, the guys that remain in the administration from administration to administration to administration, the underlings, not the number one guys, but the underlings are there forever. And they would say, well, we got to pull this information together. It's going to take us a while. We got to go to this agency and that agency, and somehow it never gets done. And we've seen some of that, like I said before, with the what's going on today, where they say, well, we got to do this report. And I am convinced what happened was when the mandate came down to produce this report in 6 months, the people in charge figured they're going to forget about it in 6 months. We don't have to worry about it. And then suddenly, in the week just prior to the date it was due, the news media and the UFO community began asking questions about it. Oh, my God, we've got to come up with something. And so they came up with that ridiculous report, and they put it off for, well, we got additional information, we're doing this, that, and the other thing, we've got to put it off. And they just never get the things done. And now we're dealing with, well, NASA may be looking at it, but what are they going to be looking at? We're told that they're not only going to go back to 1996 to look at the information, well, what about everything that went on before then? I think Christopher Mellon said recently that they were really going to go back to 1945, which would have been the Foo Fighters from World War II, and, of course, the Ghost Rockets, and then we get into the Roswell case. But it's just all over the board, and you just see how they're manipulating the situation and hoping other things would get in the way of having to worry about this UFO stuff.
If it breaks the way we expect it to, the way we want it to, how do you think it'll be announced to us, Kevin?
I think the aliens are going to have to do it. They're going to have to land in such a way and in such a situation that it can't be denied. That's the other thing you learn in intelligence. You know, you've got this
almost like the day the Earth stood still, right down there in Washington, D.C.
Yes. But you have this situation where in intelligence you deny everything. If it's classified, you deny it, even though the other people may know something about it. You deny it, knowing full well that the enemy can come out with the information. A good example of this was President Eisenhower denying that we were spying on the Soviets with the U-2 spy planes. He said, no, we're not doing that sort of thing. Denying it, and then the Russians showed up with Gary Powers and the wreckage of the U-2, and they said, well, you got us. And I think that's where we're going to be with the disclosure of the UFO information. It's the aliens are going to decide, we are here, deny it now. You know, we've landed in Central Park, or we've landed on the mall in Washington, D.C., and there's going to be no denying that they're here. I think that's the way it's going to happen. I don't think pressure from the population is going to force the government to do anything. They're going to dodge like they've been doing for 75 years, and they're very good at deflecting the attention to something else. I mean, we see it already with the Navy cockpit videos. We're given these cockpit videos, and they say, this is really anomalous. This is really incredible. We don't know what it is. And now we're hearing, well, it's a technological glitch in the new technology we've put in.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're diverting the attention, and it looks like the same game plan that they've been using for basically 75 years.
Are other countries a little more approachable with this subject?
It seems that some are. But one of the things I noticed when I was doing one of the books, the Australians approached the United States about UFOs because they had been impressed with some of the stuff that Don Kehoe had written in his books about UFOs. And the Air Force, our Air Force, responded to the Australian Air Force, said, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a nut. He just can't believe him. He doesn't have any inside information. In today's environment, we know that Kehoe was right about 90% of the time. But the Australians backed off because they're getting the information from our guys saying there's nothing to it. And I think that harmed the cooperation of the governments around the world about this. The French seem to be a little bit more open to this. It seems that periodically the British are more open to it. But I think a lot of it is geared to the United States being the leader in the UFO world. And I think it's because we have the Roswell thing. And I think that's really kind of the key to the whole thing is the Roswell case. And because we have that puts us a step ahead of some of the other countries in the world. They don't have something that definitive.
Fantastic work. Kevin Randle with us. We're going to take calls next hour with Kevin. His blog is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Lex will have that up there for you. And his books are still available, are you not? Understanding Roswell is the brand new one. Where do you get that book, Kevin?
Oh, you can get it on Amazon. You could go there right now and download it on your Kindle or your various computer devices that way. And there's a kind of a companion called Roswell in the 21st Century that takes a deep dive into some of the things that had gone on prior to that and give you a better perspective on how things developed. And Understanding Roswell takes you in a little bit different direction from that. But there's a whole raft of books on UFOs. I think one of the most important cases is the level land sightings, which were the objects close to the ground stalling cars, and there were witnesses at multiple locations, and the Air Force was involved in the investigation and law enforcement. And I think that's a really good, solid case. It's been kind of overshadowed by the Roswell case. There's similar circumstances taking place in France, for example, in 1954, and in South America in 1954, that there really is no explanation for how that happened other than the extraterrestrial.
How is television, radio handling things today?
I see them being a little bit more forthright than they used to be. It used to be they were very tongue-in-cheek and had the attitude was, I'm too sophisticated to believe in these flying saucers, for crying out loud. And it seems today that many of them are looking at it with a little bit more seriousness. They try to get a little bit deeper into the information.
They're not laughing anymore, are they?
A lot of them aren't laughing anymore. Some of them still are because they're too sophisticated. But it seems that the attitude is changing, and that's a positive step for us. And I think it's because we in the UFO community have stepped up our scientific methodology in our investigations, and we're not nearly as credulous as we used to be. We look at the stuff very, very carefully, and we have the documentation, and we have the scientific evidence, and we have the witness testimonies, and we're very much more careful about how we put it together. I was talking to James Van Allen a number of years ago, and I asked him that specific question, what we can do. And he said, take a look at it from a dispassionate point of view. Don't get, look at it with interest, but don't let your bias carry you along. And I think that was a good point that he made. Be dispassionate in your research. Look for the truth.
Kevin, we're going to come back and take calls with you next on Coast to Coast.
This hour
we'll take your calls with Kevin Randle as we talk about the field of ufology on Coast to Coast, so get ready. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with our friend Kevin Randle. Kevin, by the way, appears either Thursday or Friday on Coast to Coast Weekly with a weekly UFO report. And those stories just keep coming in too, Kevin, don't they?
There are good stories coming in on a daily basis. And you have to sort through them to pick out the real gems. But
sure.
And I preach about the multiple chains of evidence, and I think that Fran Ridge with the Madar Network has done a marvelous job of creating a network of stations around the world, in essence, that will search for certain anomalies, like the compass deviations that suggest something's going on. So you not only have a sighting by somebody, but independently verified by this instrumentality that they've created out there. So we've got good information, good scientific information being collected now.
Kevin Randle, you're one of a kind, my friend, and keep doing what you're doing. And gosh, what's your next project?
I am finishing a book called 1973, and it kind of began with my talking to Calvin Parker about the abduction that they experienced in
Pascagoula, yeah.
In 1973. And it struck me that people focus on that, but they don't understand the complexity of what was going on in the UFO world in 1973. So I look at everything that was going on, especially that wave of sightings that took place from the end of August to about the middle of November 1973, and get an idea of just exactly what's going on. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier with the lack of robust sightings, and here was a point where there was an awful lot of those robust sightings with multiple abductions around the country. The Hickson Parker one, of course, being the most well-known, but the Coin helicopter case where the UFO positioned itself above a helicopter and kind of lifted it up 3,500 feet. And good sightings like that. So that's what I've been working on. That's, I think, is going to the publisher here in just a few weeks, and it'll be out sometime a little bit later in the year.
I have a friend who's been a great newsman in his career, went on to train police departments. He's been on our show in our news segments because he's got a company called Line of Duty that literally trains police departments during episodes that occur. But in his earlier career, he was a radio and television reporter here in the St. Louis area, Kevin. And he was assigned a story years ago, I'm wondering if you remember it, in Ellsbury, Missouri, where there was an incredible UFO flap. And he remembers going there, and this is a guy who's very above board. He remembers going there, and he saw maybe like 8 or 9 cows walking together in a circle one by one, right next to each other, making a circle, and they refused to go in the middle of the circle. They just kept walking around the circle, all 8 or 9 of these cows. And he said the thing that really shook him up was that he saw a tree next to that circle, and on the side of the tree, it was scorched. Almost like somebody took a blowtorch to it, with millions of dead flies melted into the tree. Now, what in the world would do something like that? And again, this came during UFO reports.
I think that when we get down to the nitty-gritty in the UFO reports, we look at the solid reports. We don't deal with the lights in the night sky and that sort of thing. We deal with the people seeing actual craft. And I think that kind of explains it. It may be something that is generated in the power or the way the things operate that cause bizarre behaviors. I know that with the electromagnetic effects that we talked about a little bit, with the Leveland case, for example, stalling the car engines, but we also know that animals react to those electromagnetic fields. And we've got the case in Socorro, New Mexico with Lonnie Zamora, talking about as the thing lifted off, you can't believe it would be a chemical rocket, and they looked at some of the material left behind. There a mesquite plant that was smoking, but it was not hot, and that this chemical or whatever this exhaust was did this bizarre thing to it. So I think when we look at some of the anomalies with the UFO field, we're going to get those kind of questions that just don't. That we don't have answers for it because we need more information about it and how all of this interacts with the environment, our environment.
Let's go to the phones, and let's start by going to Roswell, New Mexico. David's with us. Welcome to the show. Hi, David.
Hi, George and Mr. Randle. I lied. I'm actually in Socorro, or near 30 miles from Socorro.
Well, there's a great case out there, too, with Lonnie Zamora.
Yeah, exactly. I wish I would have talked to him before he passed, but I...
Well, I can tell you one thing about Lonnie Zamora. He probably wouldn't have talked to you about it because he became very closed-mouthed about his sightings in later years. I had a friend, Bob Cornett, who was at the very large array there in the Magdalena area, and on a lark, he called Lonnie Zamora one night to see what was going on, and Lonnie Zamora says, well, we're having a barbecue. You can come over, but we're not going to talk about that UFO.
That's interesting. Go ahead, David.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. I was going to say, you beat me to it. I was just going to say that same thing, that I had been told by somebody who talked to him directly that he did not want to talk about it anymore, which I don't quite understand, but, I do and I don't. But I got a bunch of issues I could talk about, but the one thing in particular that I want to talk about was the speed of light. Einstein said it, so it must be gospel, but I don't buy it. Why is the speed of light a terminal velocity when, for instance, the speed of sound is not a terminal velocity? The sound is something other than an actual physical object. Sound is just it's something separate. And the same thing with light. Light is just energy that is bouncing off of something, and why does energy bouncing off of something mean that the something that's being bounced off of can't go faster and faster and faster and faster? Did Einstein explain that?
Well, I think you're kind of confused. I think the speed of light is set up as the limit. That's as fast as you can go. But there are other properties that figure into that. As you move to relativistic speeds, then the mass of your craft begins to expand, and you have other additional problems with it. There was a time a number of years ago where they were talking about this subatomic particle called a tachyon that they thought moved faster than the speed of light. So right now, our physics tells us that we can't travel faster than the speed of light, and there's all these inherent problems with it. But there may be ways to defeat that as well. They talk about, number one, wormholes, or generating a gravitational area that kind of bends the universe to your way of thinking. The best example I can think of is if you put a dot two ends of a piece of paper, 11 inches apart. Well, they're 11 inches apart, but if you can fold that paper, then they touch, and that changes the whole dynamic of getting from one point to another. So there is talk in our science about how we can defeat the interstellar distances. Right now, we want to talk about our science. Well, we can't do that. We can't go that fast. We can't defeat this barrier. But there may be ways that we don't understand that it can be done. So we have to look at all of that.
And they've learned how to bend, I'm convinced, space and time, where if you put two dots on the end of a piece of paper, one at one end, one at the other, fold them over so the two dots touched, they're basically traveling like that. They've learned how to do something like that, Kevin.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. And I know in science fiction, an awful lot of the discussion is about that sort of thing, ways of bending space or warping space to our travel so that we can get from here to there. And then you have to wonder, well, what kind of energy is required to do that sort of thing? And is it harder to go short distances than it is longer distance? I know if you take a look at our airline industry, it's easier to go from New York to Los Angeles than it is to go from Des Moines to Los Angeles. It's a shorter trip, but to get there, you've got to do these other things because, we live in flyover country and that sort of thing. So you've got to look at all of those sorts of things. But we really don't understand all of this right now, and our science is changing on a daily basis, and our physics is changing.
Kevin, explain the Lonnie Zamora, the late police officer's UFO case.
Well, again, I did a book called Encounters in the Desert where I looked at this thing in depth. And the one thing that got me started on this is I was talking to a couple people, Ben Moss and Tony Angelo, and they were telling me that people had called the police station prior to Lonnie Zamora seeing the object, the object landing in Socorro. And I wanted to know, well, did you look at the police records? Did you look at the police records? And I never got an answer from them on that. So I began looking at it myself and found an actual report from the night of the sighting that said basically people had called the police station, so there were other witnesses. But Lonnie Zamora was chasing a speeder, heard a noise or an explosion on the edge of town, thought a dynamite shack might have exploded, and he went over to see what was going on. He came up over a rise, and down in the arroyo below him, he could see a craft a thing that he thought was an overturned car at first, and as he approached, he realized it was more of an egg-shaped object, and there were two beings outside it. He got within 50 feet of it. I mean, he got close to it, so he got a good look at it. The craft eventually took off, and as I mentioned, it left some areas of burned areas and smoking debris behind, and there were landing pads as well, landing traces as well. Those were inspected almost immediately by government officials. A guy named Captain Holder, who was an Army officer, and an FBI agent named Burns, interviewed Zamora that night about what he had seen and what he had done. He was afraid that he had seen some kind of experimental craft from White Sands and might get in trouble for talking about it, but there's no evidence that is a possible solution. The problem with the case had always been, well, it's single witness, and then, as I said, I got involved in it and discovered there were these additional people who'd seen the thing in the sky prior to Zamora seeing it, had called the police. The police didn't write down their names.
Oh, jeez.
And nobody bothered to follow up on this. And I'm thinking, Socorro, back in 1964, April of 1964, when the landing took place, wasn't that big. You knew the flight path based on what Lonnie Zamora had seen. It wouldn't have been that hard to knock on doors and say, did you hear this? Did you see this? Gather that information. But somehow that never was done. The Air Force investigated. It is one of the very few cases, I think there's 3, in the Project Blue Book files where the witness saw alien beings, creatures.
And isn't it that case that got J. Allen Hynek, who was heading up Project Blue Book, to start believing in ETs?
It began to change his mind. The head of Project Blue Book at the time was an Air Force officer named Quintanilla, and he was kind of rabidly anti-UFO, but he said in his memoirs that this was the one case he couldn't explain. And he said he knew the UFO nuts would just have a field day with this, but he had no explanation for it. It's one of the 3 cases in which beings were seen and the witnesses were not labeled as having some kind of psychological problem. They accepted it. Quintanilla said that he believed that the answer to the case was in Zamora's head, meaning that he had seen something or understood something that hadn't been properly communicated to the investigators. But Hynek did go investigate, and it was one of the things that began to turn him around because of the nature of Zamora and other sightings that were taking place in New Mexico at the time, which the Air Force denied Hynek permission to investigate. So he's in New Mexico. There's another landing the next day in La Madera, New Mexico, which I think is up toward Santa Fe. And he wanted to go and investigate that case, and the Air Force says, no, you can't do that. You got to come back to Ohio. So you've got all that dichotomy going on, and there were additional witnesses to seeing UFOs in the area at the time. So it becomes a much more solid case when you take a look at the whole thing. And that's what I did encounter in the desert, was look at it, not just the Zamora end of it, but all the other things going on in New Mexico with UFOs around that time.
I think that came down, Kevin, from a mothership. That's my guess.
I would go along with that. I can't see that the craft that Zamora saw would have been an interstellar craft, and so it would suggest that it had to go meet something else. Not unlike our lunar lander going back up.
That's right. Exactly.
To get back to the Earth. So I think about that. And the other thing, when you talk about the mothership idea, you say, well, why do we have all these various kinds of UFOs? And I'm thinking, well, let's pretend you didn't know what an aircraft carrier was, and you've got how many different kinds of aircraft being carried on the aircraft carrier. You not only have the fighters, but you've got helicopters, you've got prop planes, you've got all this other stuff going on that comes off the aircraft. They all have specific missions. So why wouldn't an interstellar craft have various kinds of craft to do various kinds of missions when they get to their destination?
Let's go to Susie in Burlington County, New Jersey. Welcome, Susie.
Oh, hi, George and Mr. Kevin Randle.
Hi.
I'm lost at getting any help with what's going on where I live. I've already tried to get hold of Marco Rubio, and for some reason, and MUFON was actually here at my place to witness.
What'd you see?
It started like 3 years ago, and all of a sudden there was these just bright things in the sky. You couldn't miss it. I noticed it. I don't know how other people. I'm in a mobile home park, and you can't even see this mobile home park from the road. It's very hidden.
Yeah.
And we're not far from there, McGuire, Fort Dix, Joint Air Force Base, and Army Base.
And you can't get anybody out there to investigate these things?
I try. Everybody's keeping quiet about it. And I am scared to death because a few of these objects, I went outside. They threw fire down at me, okay?
Oh, geez.
Stream of flames. They could have killed me, but they didn't make the fire go right on me, right in front of me.
Well,
I was on the phone with a friend. I was screaming out there. I was so terrified I didn't even want to live here anymore. I'm still in this mobile home.
Kevin, do you think they're ET related?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this sounds suspiciously like the Cash Landrum case from 1980, where
she got burned, didn't she?
Yeah, and it seemed like it was radiation burns, radiation sickness, and that sort of thing. And it sounds somewhat similar to that, but the Cash Landrum thing was a single event, and this is an ongoing thing. And you say MUFON has been out to investigate?
George Filer, you can look him up. He was in the service for years.
He's one of the giants of MUFON.
Exactly.
Yes, I know George Filer.
But he came out, Susie?
Yes, he came with a man named Frank. I don't know Frank's last name. They were on my porch. I was so happy finally to get somebody that would see this and witness it. That's all I wanted. Someone to know what's going on here.
What can you do to keep up with this kind of story, Kevin? I guess keep checking in with MUFON? Well,
absolutely. Keep on George's tail. But have you recorded anything? You got videotape or digital recordings, photographs, or anything like that?
I think anyone is aware. I think the Air Force Base definitely knows. George Filer told me that he actually followed UFOs when he's a pilot. He was a pilot. He said he used to follow UFOs. Then he told me at Fort Dix, the Army base, that's next to McGuire Air Force Base, he witnessed a gray alien being shot. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Filer, I said, you didn't shoot it, did you? And he said, no. And I said, why was it shot? And he said to me, because it was told to stop, and it wouldn't stop. It was at the base. They must have had it as a prisoner. He didn't go into detail. He just told me that it would not stop.
I don't blame him at all. Kevin, we're going to come back and chat more with our final segment. Definitely, Suze, get a hold of MUFON and keep pushing. And maybe you, Kevin, can call George Filer about this Burlington County, New Jersey case and mention Susie's name. Back with final calls in a moment. Be back with Kevin Randle and take final calls in just a moment here on Coast to Coast. Next hour, we'll talk about the spirit world, so get ready for that. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie along with Kevin Randle. Kevin, what keeps driving you? What keeps pushing you in this field?
I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know exactly what's going on. I've been looking at it, investigating the UFO phenomenon for actually more than 50 years now.
Wow.
And I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know that there's interstellar flight. I want to know that there's alien life out there. I want to know these things beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, we can look at it today and say, yeah, we got some good evidence. It leads us in that direction. There's no explanation for a number of great cases here on Earth, but I want to get to that final bit of evidence where it's no longer a matter of debate.
You want to know we are not alone, don't you?
Absolutely. And if they'll land pretty soon, maybe I'll have a chance to go into space.
Would you go if they wanted to take you?
Yes.
What if they didn't bring you back?
That would be annoying.
A one-way trip.
There's a number of circumstances that have to come into play before I'd say yeah to that.
Lots of calls lining up for you. Let's go west of the Rockies. Chief is with us in Henderson, Nevada. Hey, Chief, thanks for calling.
Yes, hey, how you doing, sir?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. My story is really long, so I was going to mail you my book about my life. And I was abducted when I was about 10 years old. I'm a full-blooded Sioux Ponca Indian, and I was taken to, to the outer side of around the moon, through the universe and everything. And I was taught, implanted in my brain, that the fact that I could fly jets, that I could navigate ships around the world, I could operate any type of machinery and everything. And that didn't kick in until I was 17, when this guy in the post office said, "Hey, would you like to go to the Navy?" And I said, "What for?" And he said, "Fly jets." That turned me on to join the Navy, and I went to the ships.
Good for you.
Boot camp, which was difficult because I got bored of that. And I said I could navigate rather than chip paint, and they couldn't believe it. So I picked up the section, I done went through it, and they started calling me Chief, and they objected to that. Then I was a POW. I hit a communist that was attacked me, and they shaved my head, put me in a brig in Yokosuka, Japan, for 3 days, bread and water, and treated me like a prisoner. And then I went on to Vietnam, helped kill over a million of the enemy, and on a rocket ship. And then I trained with the first SEAL team at SEER, went into country on PBRs and such. You were in the Navy, and I got out, and I was out for 3 years with post-traumatic stress. And then in 1972, they came and got me and found me in a bar. I was broke, lost my car and everything. I went back in, and I navigated the ship Henry B. Wilson over to Captain U.S. with Smaragwes. And what I'm saying is that this guy that I went with, I was down by the river playing, and he said, "Would you like to go on a trip?" And I said, "Yeah, I might as well." I was 10 years old. And some people, I've told only very few people, my wife of 40-some years, and nobody else ever. And she said it was probably a guardian angel. I said, no, I went with this guy in this ship, and he took me to outer space, and he gave me this knowledge, and I was able to do what he taught me.
Wow. Chief, did he look like a human, or did he look more alien?
No, he was a human, and he was dressed like in a robe. And you know how, like, when you look over when he came towards me, he came out of this big sewer. We had a big sewer there that you could, it was 10 by 20 or something, and his craft was in there. And he he just said, "Come on with me and take me on a trip." But you know how when you look at the highway when it's hot and it's wavy,
got that wavy look to it.
That's the way it was. And when I walked through the curtain of the waviness, it was like I was cleansed or something. Then I was inside the ship, and we were off into the universe. And I saw the Earth as I was leaving. I went around Africa. I saw everything. I saw the animals and everything. We shot around the moon. I went to the dark side of the moon, and I saw crafts on the moon, and they were doing some things. And I was asking them questions. And now I know what it was. It was nanotechnology, what he was using, because when he would tell me something, and then he would touch something, it would change to something else. I learned that finally later.
Are you still in touch with them, Chief?
No, they tried to capture me in about 1975 in Nevada. I lost track of time. I was driving on the freeway to Salt Lake City, and I stopped into a diner that it seemed like it was the 1940s because I'm 75, and it says, man, and this gal came up with her pencil, said, hi, hon, and all this. Got a cup of coffee, went off the freeway the wrong way, and they tried to corner me in a farmhouse. Somebody tried to capture me again. I had an M16 and a 44 Magnum with me, and I drove straight on home to Nebraska. And he told me that they would try to do that, but...
well, I'm glad you're okay. Kevin, sounds like this is a movie, doesn't it?
It sounds like a great movie, as a matter of fact.
My God, if you said, Chief, you got a book, definitely get it to us. We've got more calls here, but that's an incredible story. Norman in St. Louis. Hey, Norm, go ahead.
Hey, just a comment and then a question.
Sure.
Back about 6 years ago, my son and I were out in St. Louis by Lambert Airport for the, I believe it was called Palladius, and it was a meteor shower, and we seen two UFOs. I'm sure they were. They were about 100,000 feet up, and they were zipping real fast, and they'd make real quick left and right turns going west to east, about a half hour after each other. And then I seen a video of one that was like over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and it was like hundreds of tourists that had
remember
cameras, and I never heard that get debunked, but that was a pretty cool one. But my comment, or question, I guess, is like if you go, over the years, you got dinosaur bones, and then you got, Bible artifacts like King David coins and signs of Sodom and Gomorrah, which just kind of verifies your faith in God or the Bible or whatever. Mm-hmm. It just seems over the years that the odds of a UFO and aliens maybe say crash into the Arch in St. Louis or crash into the Antarctic, and they would be preserved really well. Why hasn't people seen it? I mean, personally, I'm not trying to be mean or nothing. I'm Italian, but if I seen an alien in my backyard, I'd try to rough it up and duct tape it till I could get NASA or somebody to come.
Let's see, Kevin. I think we do have these, don't we?
Well, if you look at the Roswell case, there were 4 bodies retrieved there, but I think the problem is that sort of thing is obviously extremely rare, almost unique in this respect. And I think that the problem is a lot of the UFO information gets lost in the noise. People see things in the sky they can't explain that have mundane explanations, and you've got people. UFO investigators are chasing those things down, trying to find out was it really something alien or was it something more mundane? And I think a lot of it gets lost in that sort of thing. There are any number of cases where people have shot at this thing, and I mentioned the book 1973 that I'm working on now. There's a number of cases in 1973 where the first thing that people did was shoot at the UFOs or shoot at the aliens. There was a case from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where they were shooting at the aliens, and it didn't do any good. It didn't stop them. That they, I guess, to use the old phrase, they were immune to bullets. That sort of thing. So we got to look at all of that sort of thing and determine what is legitimate, what is reality, and what is fiction. So I think that might answer part of the question of why we don't have these sorts of things in today's environment.
Good point. Ed, Charlotte, North Carolina. Hello, Eddie. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks, George. I enjoy, Mr. Randle, all your work, and I'd like to bring a couple things up. I think you need to sometimes adapt to what your source is. And my point is, my uncle was many years in China and got some key Americans out when World War II started from over in that part of the world, and he became head of Far Eastern language at Harvard. Now, you got 1.5 billion or more Asians, and they would bring in Mongolian tablets, and nobody could read them over there, but he could dust them off and read them. You have the Rosetta Stone. I mean, you have the Egyptian things. They couldn't read them until somebody happened to have the talent to decipher them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sitchin, at 10 years old, he was telling his Jewish scholars, no, you got that wrong, And so he and these are on stones which are for preservation of what happened, as long as they're not weathered. I mean, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls on paper, but they were rolled up and put in clay jugs in a cave. So to preserve them, you have the Sumerian text or whatever that Sitchin just looks at it. He's just reading what he sees. They're just reading what they say. And I think that, to me, that adds a lot of credence. Now, he brought up the thing about coming here to mine gold, and also, George, you had someone on that had found 50, 100, 150,000 circles, and I won't take the time, but they were directly underneath the pyramid going down into Africa, and he talked about abandoned gold mines, and he took one of these stones to go to Hawaii to give a talk, and when he landed in New York, the thing, he had it in a briefcase. It set off all the alarms in the airport, and yet, he couldn't detect any.
Yeah, I believe that was Michael Tellinger.
Yeah, and so, and the last thing I want to ask you, George, is you had the palm reader on your anniversary show. Is he the one that was in London?
No, he's here.
I know he is in L.A., right?
Yeah.
But didn't he say you had one on last year that had gone from L.A., was working in London, and he talked about...
That might have been him, Vernon
Him,
Hubble.
I think.
Yeah.
It was him, and I tell you what, this is what hits me, Mr. Randle, is sometimes when you get somebody that he should not be talking at all about reptilians or anything, but why? This happened to him. He was there, and he said... these reptilian people were coming to me, and he described them as not able to feel emotions. They were very unemotional, and he said they were incredibly more brilliant than we are, and he was so uncomfortable they would use him for business deals. He was so uncomfortable he went back home to L.A. Now see, I wasn't expecting to hear that from him, but someone who pointed out the reptilian to me in a couple of sentences that has real good reason, in my opinion, to know. A few years earlier, had told me they don't experience love like us. They're very non-emotional. They don't, and they're cold-blooded, and they are very, very much more intelligent than we are. So I'm just saying, I think you need to look to your sources sometimes, and I guess my strength's relating the normally unrelatable, but I love to find a source like the palm reader that I'm not expecting to hear anything from him on reptilians, George.
He was one of the best. Kevin, what do you hear about reptilians?
I hear very little about it. I know that there's discussion about them as part of one of the races involved in the abduction phenomenon. And I've talked to a number of abductees who did mention, and they weren't really talking about reptilians, but talking about how the aliens didn't understand our emotional makeup, didn't know how we thought and how we felt, and it was part of what they were attempting to learn by their abductions here on Earth, to get a better feel on how we think, because they didn't understand it.
Next up, let's go to Joe, Long Island, New York. Hey, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Kevin. You could consider any place on the Earth as a kind of strange landscape, but to me, for example, lower Arizona, as you go towards the Mexican border, seems very strange, almost like another planet. So I'm wondering if you've seen patterns where these crafts or sightings would be located in certain landscapes that might be more appealing to those aliens.
There are hot spots that people talk about, and there are points where UFOs were seen frequently and not so much anymore. Ted Phillips was looking at some stuff in southern Arkansas, I believe it was, where they were having some almost nightly type observations of things. We could take a look at the Marfa Lights, which is an ongoing phenomenon that nobody seems to have a good explanation for. I think what we see, though, is there are hot spots, and sometimes we don't get all the information. In today's environment, it's not quite as bad as it used to be, but we don't get all the information, so we are unable to pick some of this stuff out. But if you're dealing with multiple alien races, it would seem to me that they might prefer a certain environment. One race might like the desert heat and the dryness, and another might like the cold of the Antarctic. It's just, you kind of have to look at that sort of thing and figure it out from there. But as I say, we kind of lump all the UFOs into one big basket, assuming a singular motivation for them, and there may be multiple motivations, and there's probably a lot of things we don't understand about the way they operate.
Kevin, in our lifetime, do you think we're going to get the answers we're looking for?
I've been hoping of that for 50 years. and it
got another 50 left?
Yeah, I hope so. I plan to live to be 150, so we can maybe do that. I don't know. Our government has no motivation to release the information, and so we got to rely on the aliens to announce themselves and change the dynamic of the conversation. But I just don't see I just don't see any motivation for our government to release the information to us.
All right, Kevin, we'll talk to you next week with your weekly report.
Well, thank you, George. Been nice chatting with you for a long time.
Absolutely. It's about time. Kevin Randle, an expert on UFOs, and he gives us weekly UFO reports, as you well know. Up next, the spirit world. Here we go. Up next, Kathleen Dayan joins us with her work Before We Were Born. We're going to talk about the spirit world next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. 10 years ago, Kathleen Dayan worked as a lawyer and wrote in her spare time, and some personal losses led her to a spiritual journey and journal that ultimately resulted in her channeling the spirits of her loved ones and spirit guides and teachers. The information she received changed her perspective, changed her life, and she left the practice of law to write a novel based on the principles she learned, and it is called Before We Were Born. She lives in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Kathleen, welcome to the program, and good morning to you.
Good morning, George. Thank you so much for having me on.
Are you up and chipper and ready to go?
I actually am.
Great. So do you miss the practice of law at all?
I really don't, to be honest. I enjoyed practicing law for that period of my life, but there's more freedom in the life that I've chosen now in writing, and it feels more natural to me.
Good for you. What did you specialize in when you were a lawyer?
I did two different things. I primarily did trial preparation for medical malpractice defense attorneys. So it was, drawing up documents to help them while they were in trial defending doctors. And then the other thing that I practiced was domestic relations, which is primarily divorce and custody and that kind of thing. So both of them are pretty intense areas of law.
They are intense indeed. And what changed your life to get you involved in the spirit world?
Well, my husband and I have always pursued some, I guess I think of it as our spiritual education together. And we had some experiences that really just changed the way that we saw life. I lost my sister quite a ways back now, back in 2001.
Sorry to hear that.
After that, thank you very much, George. After that happened, I think the first sort of experience that I had was I had a dream that my sister came to see me after she had passed. And this was maybe 3 months later. And in this particular dream, I could see myself laying in my bed from every part of the room. So I had this, perspective of her and of myself, and I could also see her talking to me. And in the dream, we were communicating as if she were still here. So she was, talking to me about her children, and she told me, I have to move on. There was something that she needed to do. She had to go. I could see two people standing behind her. I couldn't see who they were, but I could see light around them. And she told me, I'm going to be leaving for a while, but I'll be back. And I'm going to be helping all of you. I'll be watching over you. Can you watch over my children? And then she finished. She was holding my hand. I could feel it. And then she stood up, and I saw her go out the wall behind me, which was the wall that led to the outside of the house. And that was the first time I thought, I really think I spoke to my sister.
And you're a medium now, aren't you?
I am a medium now, yes. And at that time, I think I had some mediumship abilities even then, but I didn't understand that because I can look back over time and see other dreams that I had when I was younger. Some of them were past life dreams, but I slowly became a medium because it does take a little while. But what led me to it was after she had passed, we found out about the Spiritualist Church, and that is a church where you can go, and it's very open. They have a healing service, and they also have mediums performing at every service. And we received some really good messages, and one of them was, directly that it was, my sister Mary that was at the time was standing behind my husband, and the medium called her out by name and said, "This is someone in your family. Her name is Mary, and she's telling you that my husband's a musician, and at the time he was going through some kind of turmoil with that. I don't recall exactly what it was. There was a changeover with the bands, and so she came in and she said she wanted him to know that he had a new gig coming and that everything was going to be fine. And then he ended up getting hired by this band that was one of her favorite bands, and we just thought that was super cool.
Couple weeks ago, Kathleen, I had a psychic medium on the program. And in the middle of the interview, he says, George, I got to ask you something. And I'm going, don't stop me in the middle of the interview. And he says, no, I really got to ask you something. He said, there's a person here, meaning on the other side,
yes,
who's next to me, and just wants you to know he's okay, but all I feel from him is roses. And do you know what that is? And I stopped to myself and said, oh, my God. A year ago, one of my dear friends who went by the name of Johnny Rose died. And I was with him the night before he died. He didn't seem right. He may have had COVID, and he passed away the next day. We couldn't find him, and then we sent the police to his house, and there he was, dead in bed. Oh, but he went by the name of Johnny Rose, and here's this psychic medium telling me there's someone on the other side who wants to let you know he's okay, but I see roses all around him. It's got to be the same guy, right?
Absolutely. It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it makes you a believer. It really does when these things start to happen. Had you, prior to any of this, did you have any doubts about the existence of the afterlife?
I always sort of pulled in that direction, George. I mean, even as a child, I was a very spiritual person. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I used to, I had these little books I used to carry around and read, and little religious books, and I found out that I couldn't be a priest. That's what I wanted to be when I was a child. And I found out because I was not a boy that I couldn't be a priest, which really shocked me because I was raised in a family of, I'm one of 5 girls, and my parents were the original feminists. Like they always told us, you can do anything boys can do, do not, let anybody limit you.
Good.
So that was the first time I had that happen. I pulled away from the Catholic Church when I was older. I always felt this connection, and I always believed that there was, a higher power out there and that I was connected to it.
And so you don't need something organized to let you believe that?
I don't. And I think maybe some people do. I feel that, our spiritual path is very individual. I think everybody has their own personal path, and this has been mine. I had some other experiences that led me to want to pursue mediumship on my own. And it was messages from other mediums. But once we started pursuing this on our own, it became really clear that there are people around us who are watching over us, and these are our loved ones, and they are okay. They've passed out of this world, and they're no longer sick. They're no longer in pain. They still love us, and they're right here supporting us.
Kathleen Dayan with us. Her website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Her book that basically came out sometime last year, didn't it, before we were born?
Actually, it came out in December in the UK, and in the U.S. it just came out on two or 3 days ago on the 3rd.
Okay, so your timing's perfect, isn't it?
It really is.
What did you learn, Kathleen, about the soul?
You know, some of the things that I learned is that the soul always continues. That even when we go through this, death is a transition. So even when we go through that transition, there's not even a blink. It's just it's like walking from one room into another, which is incredible. I also learned that love doesn't end. So the feelings that you have for people here on Earth, the relationships that you have, they continue. Those people are still there. And the more you're able to open up to that, the more you can feel them and become aware of them. As I was becoming a medium, I started feeling all kinds of different things that would allow me to know someone was near me. And after a while, I could identify, who it was. But I don't know if you've heard of the term clairsentience. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. And clairaudience.
Yes, that's right. So these kinds of things. So clairsentience is the first thing that happened to me. And I had, initially I had a burning feeling on where my third eye is. And I also had, when the spirit would be near me, like during meditation or sometimes before I went to sleep at night, I could feel, it felt like spider webs on my skin, on my arms and my hands, and I would feel this electric energy going through my hair, kind of like I just, ran across a carpet with my socks on, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's clairsentience, and it did, it took a little while before I got to the point where I could hear, and that would happen. At first, it happened when I was getting ready for sleep, right before I'd fall asleep. I hear someone call my name, and I began to hear more often during mediumship. I could put together, 2 or 3 words, and then it got to the point where I was able to channel, which so words would actually come through me.
At what point did you start believing in reincarnation?
I had always wondered about that, George. I'd also always felt that maybe this was what I was dreaming about, because when I was younger, I did have dreams about other lifetimes, what felt to me like other lifetimes. I identified the person in the dream. For instance, there was one where I was in a car and I was driving, and it was probably in the 1940s or 50s maybe. And I was in this car, and I was watching it from above, and in the distance I could hear there was a parade going on. I was in a small town, and I knew I was about to pass over. And I had that dream, numerous times, things like that. But I became aware of reincarnation more clearly when I started communicating with spirit, and they gave us so many points about how, it's not just this one lifetime, and to really think bigger, to realize that we're really this tremendous soul, and this lifetime is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And at one point, one of our spirit friends said to us, think of a diamond, and think of every little facet of that diamond, that little flat edge. Each one of those is a lifetime. But the real you, the soul, is inside that gem.
Now, with the reincarnation, have you had past incarnations?
I have had past incarnations, and I believe that we all have. But that's just, I think that we're all here, walking this earth right now for a little while, and I think we're going to pass back to spirit, and I think we're going to make decisions of when we want to come back. I do believe we play a role in that, and who we're going to incarnate with and how that's going to happen. I think there are even sort of like plot points planned out along the way. So you know there's going to be certain people you're going to meet up with in that next life. I believe that that's the way that it goes, although not everything is planned out. But I do think that there are people that we know we're going to meet because we planned it before we got here. Having that kind of information made me want to share this because I felt privileged to be hearing this, and it took so much of my fear away of death and losing people that I love. I felt so much lighter, George, from hearing this, that I felt like this was a privilege that I would like to share. I am a storyteller. I have always been a storyteller, I think. But for me, I wanted to pass this information on, not in some kind of a nonfiction textbook or something, because that's not really who I am. That's not really the way I write. But also because I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on reincarnation. I'm just someone that was privy to some information, and it all made sense to me. It all added up, and I'm talking about really years of communicating with spirit and notebooks full of communications. And I decided I'm going to write this book, and it's called Before We Were Born, because these two souls make a decision before they come here to be together again. And we find out that they've traveled through different lifetimes together. So this story is based on one lifetime. And these two people are born in a coastal town in Massachusetts. And one of them, the woman, chooses a family because the mom was her mom in a past lifetime, and she wants to be close to her again and have that experience. And her partner is not really as excited about the idea, and he wants to wait. But he follows her, and he chooses a mom that is close to her, that lives right down the street, so that he knows he'll meet his soulmate again. But the mom that he chooses is an alcoholic, and he's born with fetal alcohol syndrome. So he has a lot of challenges. And I wrote it that way because, things do happen. I mean, I believe that we come here and we have certain people that we travel with, not just romantic partners, but all kinds of family members and friends, partnerships. And I think we have a lot of that planned out. But, life happens. Things happen along the way, and it's not always easy.
We're with Kathleen Dayan, and what your middle name is an interesting middle name.
Oh, it's Reddy. Reddy, R-E-A-D-Y.
Is that a parental name, or how'd that come?
Yeah, it came from my dad. Yeah.
How about that? And her website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Let's talk about some reincarnation stories that you are familiar with, and we've got a break coming up in a couple of minutes. But tell us about the story of the little boy, James Leininger.
Oh, yeah, that's so fascinating. So this is something I became aware of. I love learning all of these stories. So this little boy, James Leininger, he was about 2 years old, and he started having nightmares. And he was screaming about, he would say, plane on fire, little man can't get out. He kept repeating this, and his parents didn't know what was happening with their child. They were really, worried about him. And then he started talking more and more and saying that he had lived before and that he was a fighter pilot in World War II. And he named the kind of plane that he was in, which was called a Corsair.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he had been shot down over Japan. And he started becoming very specific. He said that he flew off of a ship called the Natoma. And he named his best friend, who was Jack Larson. And so his parents started digging into some of this to find out if this could possibly be true. And they found this man named Jack Larson who confirmed that his best friend had died, was shot down in his plane, and that his name was actually James in his last life, too. I can't remember what his last name was, but his first name was James then, too. And he actually went with his dad to a reunion of all of the soldiers who had flown off of the Natoma. and met some of these people.
And he knew them, didn't he?
He did. And he had some, yes, he did. And he had some other interesting things that he was able to say. You know, his father asked him one day, well, how did you end up here? How did you end up with us in this lifetime? And he said, I knew you'd be a good dad. And he said, I saw you in Hawaii. You were in a pink hotel on the beach. And he said, and I knew you were going to be a good dad. So I chose you. And his dad and his mom had actually spent their 5th anniversary in a hotel like that on the beach in Hawaii.
And they maybe conceived the little guy there, huh?
That's right. I'm thinking so, yes.
That's fantastic.
Fascinating.
That is fascinating. And we'll talk about a couple more reincarnation stories in a moment, Kathleen. It's just fantastic. You must really enjoy doing what you're doing now.
I love doing what I'm doing, George.
Is it fun or intriguing or both?
It's both. So the book that we're mostly discussing here, Before We Were Born, focuses on one lifetime. But right now I'm writing a sequel to it. And I want these two people to come back again. And eventually there will be a prequel where I go back in time.
Super. Hold on for a second, Kathleen. We're at the bottom hour break, but we'll be right back for more on Coast to Coast AM. We will take your calls next hour with Kathleen Dayan. Her book is called Before We Were Born. Share a story with us. Ask her a question as well about the afterlife. Jump aboard. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with Kathleen Dayan. We'll take calls with Kathleen next hour here on Coast to Coast. Her book is called Before We Were Born. Her website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Kathleen, back to reincarnation. You've said that Sri Lanka has some incredible stories. Can you give us one or two?
Yes, they do have some really interesting stories. One of them is, and again, it seems to come on with children around 2, 3, 4 years old. They start to have past life memories. And there was one that I read about that I found fascinating. And this was, a boy who was about 2 years old, and he started talking about his life as a monk. And he was able to remember, he would tell his mom that he was having pain in his chest, and then he came here, is the way he put it. And he was able to identify where he lived in the past. He was in a temple, and he was able to go there and identify the place. And he talked about certain things that seemed unusual. He said that he had an elephant in his past life, and that he used to drive a red car. And it was unusual for monks to have their own cars. But they found a person who was a monk in this same temple who had passed of a heart attack, and he did have a red car. And I guess there was an elephant in the village, and this monk had a particular liking, had kind of a relationship with this elephant where he'd go to visit him a lot. So I thought that was really spot on.
Fantastic. And also we have a Coast guest by the name of Brian Weiss, who you're very familiar with. He's got some stories, too.
Yeah, Brian Weiss is he's just amazing. He's a past life regression therapist.
Yes.
That might not know. And, and he kind of stumbled upon it, George. I know you know because you've interviewed him, but, he was treating a patient by the name of Catherine, and he was trying to help her deal with some trauma that happened as a child. She was having a lot of anxiety, and he tried to bring her back through hypnosis to identify the trauma and help her get past it, and inadvertently brought her back in between lifetimes. And then they continued this practice and went back into various lifetimes that she had lived.
What, Kathleen, is called table tipping? What is that?
Oh, table tipping? It's a form of physical mediumship, and the way it works is it's a small round table with a pedestal, not 4 legs, but like a pedestal underneath it, so it can move. I experienced it for the first time at a spiritualist church. My husband and I had heard about it. They were having a night of table tipping, and we went not having any idea what to expect. And we were at a table with two other people. One of them was the pastor of the church, and she's also a medium. And this is before I developed mediumship, so she was there and was picking up some messages while we were attempting this. But there were four of us sitting around this table, and you kind of very lightly put your fingers on the table, all of you, and like your fingertips, really. There's no real pressure. And if there's a spirit there that wants to come through and communicate with somebody, the table will start to move. And, you know, you're sitting there with intention. So it's not that you're sitting at a table having tea or something around this table. It's you have an intention of communicating with spirit. And the table starts to vibrate a little bit, and then it starts to rock. And it was really pretty mind-blowing when this happened for us. The table started to rock back and forth, and then it walked. It sounds like a crazy thing to say, that the table walked, but I don't know how else to say it other than it made its way over to me and landed in my lap.
That's amazing.
And that was one of the things that really pulled me in and wanted me to learn how to communicate, because it became very clear to me then that, yes, there are people in spirit who are close to us. The table that same night spelled out the name. When I say spelled out, it's, you know, it will rock back and forth, and if it's, you know, rocks once, it's an A. If it rocks twice, it's a B. You go through this little process with it, and it spelled out the name of my friend who had passed over, and I was grieving him, and that was really what had brought me there. And, yeah, so I had this confirmation that he still existed.
That's fantastic. It really is. What do you think of angels?
You know, I don't know what the difference is. I haven't had direct communication with angels. It seems to me to be the ones that come to me are my personal family and friends, but also I've had teachers and guides who will come in and talk to me. I'm quite sure there are angels. I just haven't had that experience.
You do private and group readings, don't you, as a medium?
No, I don't. I have never worked as a medium. As a matter of fact, George, I was very private about the fact that I'm a medium until recently. It's just something that, you know, my husband and I have done it for years now, and we'll share that with people in our family, you know, or if somebody, you know, really needs help, they're grieving, and that, you know, comes to me and says, you know, through one of my sisters or something like that, really needs a reading, I'll do that. But it's not something that I've ever done publicly.
Why not? Are you just very private about it?
I am to me it's a sacred thing. It feels to me like it's very personal because of the people I'm communicating with. They're people that I love. It just has always felt that way.
And there unfortunately are some people who say they're mediums who take advantage of people.
Yes, there are. There are. And some of them, I think, really do think they are mediums, George.
Some of them think they are. Some of them are and do a good job, and then some of them are maybe hucksters.
Yeah, it never felt like to me that it was something that I could ever take money for. I would never do that. It's hard to explain other than for me to say it's sacred work.
No, I get it.
Yeah. And so I thought, you know, the best way for me to share this talent is to write about it.
You said you were a Roman Catholic. You basically have left the church, but you're still very spiritual. A lot of people have probably followed in your same kind of footsteps. What do you think this is all about? This divine creation, this intelligent design. What is it?
You know, I feel like we've barely tapped the surface of it, George. I think it's immense. But to me, the life force that we all have is God. I perceive God in every living creature. And my spiritual practice is I follow something that I didn't even know there was a name for this until a few years ago. It's called ahimsa. It's part of an Indian practice. It's an ancient Indian practice, and it means non-injury to all living beings. And that's how I try to live, because I think that God is in everything. And, the birds outside our windows are, even the trees and everything that's alive. I feel like we're all part of this God force.
Well, I think you're right. Have you ever tried to come up with the rationale of how it started, all of this?
I don't think I'm capable of it, to be honest. I mean, it's an interesting thought. When I was a child, I remember asking my mom, well, she would say that you were made by God. And I'd say, well, who made God? And she would not know how to answer my question.
We wanted answers, didn't we?
Yes, even then. And still, but now I feel less need to, I have the intuitive connectedness to feel God, and I think I'm only going to get so far intellectually as a human being. I think to be able to feel it is enough for me.
I would ask my mother the same question, and she would give me the answer, always was, always will be. And I say, Mom, that doesn't answer my question. She said, that's the answer. He always was, always will be. But I said, I don't understand that.
Yes.
We're going to take calls next hour with Kathleen. Questions, stories, same kind of thing. If you want to give us your theories on how this all started, jump aboard. We'd love to hear from you. When you do your work as a personal medium for yourself, what has surprised you the most? One of those head-shaking episodes.
Head-shaking. Well, I can tell you a couple of short ones. While using a table and table tipping, because we don't do that as much anymore, but we did do that when I was developing mediumship. And my husband lost a friend who was a drummer. He was a really young guy, and he passed away. And when he came through, he would make the table move in such a way that it was like a rhythm. It was, and we'd always know, oh, that's Bobby. We'd say, because we could hear
You knew.
Tapping out music.
You could tell, couldn't you?
Yeah, I could tell. And another time, I was communicating with a spirit who is a personal guide to me, and he is very powerful. So people come through in different ways, and so some people come in kind of meekly. And, they, for instance, if you're using the table, it might move just a little bit. It's different for every person who comes through. But this particular guy that's a guide to me, he will come through with so much force that he has a lot of fun making the table move. So there's a pedestal and has three little feet on the bottom, moving from foot to foot and then spinning, moving so fast that it will spin on one leg. I mean, just remarkable.
If you weren't doing the mediumship primarily for yourself, what do you think you'd be doing now?
I think I'd still be writing, but I may be working part-time as a lawyer still. I don't know. I don't know if I would or not. I'm happier now. I feel like my path unfolded the way it should have. Was it a big decision for you to make that transition? Yes, it was a big decision. It was concerning because we have a family. We have two daughters, and one of them was just about to go to college, and the other one was she's 10 years younger. So we had financial concerns. Sure. And we were thinking like this is something that we wanted to do. My husband is really my true life partner, and just completely supported me with this. And I think he wanted me to leave the practice a lot more than I did because he knew that I'd always been so tuned into writing stories. Mm-hmm. So it was a leap of faith, but it brought us to a good place. Was being a lawyer kind of beating you down? It was. It was beating me down. It's not an easy thing to work that intensely, particularly when I was doing the the divorce work, and it just, to do that all day, to be in, helping people with their conflicts, and then coming home, getting home at dinner time, and having, a husband and 2 kids and a house and, a dog and all the things that it's a lot.
Are your parents still with you?
They are not. I've lost both my parents.
You have? Okay. My mother's 93. She's going to be 94 in May. Lost my father at 88, which was a pretty good run. He could have gone a little longer, but he had fallen, and I think it took its toll. But what did the family say, though, when you told them, I'm going to leave law, I want to be a medium?
The funny thing is, most people didn't know that I was a medium, and I told my sisters. So I told you I lost one sister, but I have 3 other sisters, and I told them after I got pretty good at it. In the beginning, I didn't because we had all lost our sister Mary, and I didn't want to put anything out there that I couldn't really solidify and share with them. And once I did, they understood.
How old was Mary when she passed?
She was 45.
Oh, that was young.
Young. It was very unexpected, and so it shook me. But it was one of the things that I feel like opened me up to being able to communicate.
Kathleen, what do you say to people who say, I don't believe in the afterlife? It doesn't exist. And you may get a call or two like that. That's
okay. I don't have any complaint of however people want to view it. I'm not trying to convince people. George, I've just found the information really has worked well in our lives, and I've been able to share that with, some people around us and to help them. But everybody has their own path. That's just what the spirit path is. You have to find your own way. And I would never try to convince somebody otherwise.
So you don't get into arguments with them or anything like that?
No. There's no room for argument for me. I just feel like if they're happy on that path, then that's where they should be.
There was only one time I had my immediate doubts about the afterlife, and then I snapped out of it like within 10 seconds when a friend of mine died in a motorcycle accident, and I was at the funeral home, and I'm looking at his body, and I'm going, this is it. This is it. And it was a cold, stark feeling, but I snapped out of it. I mean, I went into it knowing there's an afterlife, and I left it knowing there was an afterlife. But in between, for that split moment, it was a very stark feeling. I didn't like it.
I understand that feeling because I've had it too. And when my mom passed, I was still in my 20s, and it really took a toll on me. I was really, just
distraught.
Really distraught.
All right, we're going to come back and take calls with you, Kathleen, in a moment on Coast
Well, this
to Coast
hour
Day.
we'll take your calls with Kathleen Dayan as we talk about the afterlife. Her book is called Before We Were Born. Jump aboard, tell us a story, ask a question. And we're back with Kathleen Dayan, author of course, Before We Were Born. And let's talk a little bit more about that book. It's a novel based on what probably is really happening, isn't it, Kathleen?
It is. So the concepts that I received from communicating with spirit became the bones of the story. So I knew I wanted to have the aspect of reincarnation. I wanted to talk about that and about soulmates and how we travel together. And I also wanted to talk about spirit communication. So without giving away too much about the story, one of these 2 soulmates is going to pass part of the way through the book, and the other one needs to learn how to communicate in order to continue their relationship while one of them is still here on Earth. And so that's what I did. I used the information that came from Spirit, and I created these fictional characters. I placed them in a town that I'm very familiar with, that I used to live in, and I had them grow up there together.
And were you happy with the results?
Yes, I am happy with. I feel very connected to this story.
Tell me more. What connects you to it?
I feel like I know the characters because, you know, there's a relationship that you sort of develop when you're writing a book. I like to say I let the characters walk around in my head for a while because I want to really know who they are and how they express themselves. I just spend time thinking as I'm walking. I walk the beach a lot. I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'm right on the coast, and I walk and I think about how I want them to communicate. How would, like, for instance, one of the characters has fetal alcohol syndrome, and so he doesn't begin to speak until he's 4 years old, and he has other issues. He's really tiny when he's small. He's the size of a 2-year-old when he's 4, but he eventually sort of catches up, and it's not obvious that he has some disability, and so he's kind of accepted in school with different circles, and people don't know how much he's really struggling. And his soulmate, Joy is her name, she lives right down the street from him. And when they're children, she says, why would people think that, Jeremy isn't smart? Because he's very perceptive. So he's able to understand things. Like he'll tell her if there's going to be a rainstorm, there's a thunderstorm coming, Joy, run home, go home, and things like that. He's able to know if an animal's in pain, and he's a really intuitive, perceptive, healing kind of human being, even though his mind is as smart as hers. And so there's this contrast between the two of them, where she isn't as in touch with her soul, but she is extremely bright. So her mind is what's leading her life, whereas Jeremy is following his spirit.
Does your belief in the afterlife make you feel better?
Yes, absolutely it does. Particularly as you and I were talking about how we've had losses. When you lose a parent, it's a really hard thing to go through, and that really is what started healing me, is knowing that my parents had passed over, but they're okay. It just makes me feel better about not just my own death, knowing that I'm going to continue, but that other people that I love, they continue too. And when I speak with them, they're joyful, George. They're always, they're happy to be there talking to me. They're always supportive. They want you to reach out and ask for, help if you're struggling with something. It's changed my life in so many ways.
That's fantastic. Let's take some calls here for you as they're lining up. Aaron in Louisville, Kentucky, to get us started east of the Rockies. Hello, Aaron.
Hi, George. Hi, Kathleen.
Good to have you with us.
My question would be, why would a soul incarnate and have a difficulty in life? Why would they choose that? Like, for instance, two different individuals. One would come here and be abandoned by their mother as a baby, raised only by a father. And why would another person have an unrequited love at a young age only to have it to affect them much later in life?
I think that, so in my book, so Jeremy is born and he has these difficulties that he has to get past, but it doesn't disconnect him from his soulmate. I mean, she understands that he has different capabilities than her, and I think that she grows from it. So sometimes a soul may choose to come here and have some kind of a disability because they're not just for their own soul growth, but also for those around them, because of what that lifetime is going to look like, how that person may learn different lessons.
And when you're doing all of this, do you have any doubts at all, Kathleen, about its viability?
I really don't. I mean, it's been years of it. So there have been times along the way when I've certainly questioned. And when it first started happening to me, I was really, I was stunned by it. So, yes, I've asked a lot of questions. But at this point, I accept it. I know that I've had, I feel reinforced by I call them my spirit friends. I feel like they're around me. And I ask them for help when I need it. And I feel like I'm supported.
Next up, let's go. And Aaron, thank you for your call. Lisa is in Queens, New York. Welcome to the show. Hi, Lisa.
George. Hi, Kathleen. Happy New Year to both of you.
Well, thank you. You too.
Thank you. Well, I have a two-part question based on two of the points you made tonight. The first one is you said that souls make an agreement before they come back here to be together during this lifetime. And I have a situation where I met a man just a few months before he passed away. Actually, we didn't even meet in person. We wrote to each other all the time, and we talked on the phone every day. And I'm just wondering, is this something that we decided upon before we came here? Because it seems like a really bad idea to me now. Or did something go wrong? Were we supposed to spend this life together and something went wrong? Because I had a private session with one of the psychic mediums on George's show, and she told me that he's my soulmate. And so I'm just wondering, why would we have decided to do that? Or could something have just not worked out in this lifetime? We actually didn't even really live that far from each other, about 60 miles.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry that you went through that. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
It sounds incredibly painful.
Devastating.
Yes, I know, to find someone to feel so connected and then to lose them so quickly. I would say, sometimes people do plan that before they get here. I know that I talked earlier about my sister Mary passing, and she has come through to me on more than one occasion and has said it was all in the plan. Which is really hard to accept, because I'm thinking, well, why? Why would that plan be that way when I want you here and your kids want you here, my sisters want you here? But that was, for whatever reason, there's a bigger story at play here that we can't see all the components. And, the fact that you spoke to a medium who told you that you were soulmates, the only thing I can say to that is that you're still connected, because there really isn't an end to love. It's still there, and you still have that. And
it never fades, does it?
No, it's going to always be with you, whether you're in your body or not. And so your friend who passed, he still loves you.
Next up, let's go to Pam in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Hi, Pamela. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Hello, George and Kathleen. I'll be looking forward to getting your book. A little question and a little statement. My father was a World War II vet, a Korean War vet. I want everyone to remember to look for some signs. Every time I would get lost going to work at the hospital, midnight to 8 a.m. or 11 to 7, I would ask my dad to come, and his car would be in front of me. And it was going into Philadelphia late at night, and he would help because a lot of time we had diversions, and it was very difficult because in Temple University at night we have a lot of trouble. Yeah. So I want people to always look for their cars, look for signs, and other nurses would be in the car with me and could not believe that that exact same car would pull up in front of us and help us get through the diversion late at night and to work on time. So I just wanted to pass that on to people. Look for some signs. Yeah. I lost my daughter a year ago, and that was the last time I called in. And she was special needs, and I got a lot of relief on the phone call, and I'm wondering, I just don't feel connected to her recently because she didn't speak. It was kind of an unexpected death at the time, but she went through an awful lot. She was here 35 years, and if there's anything you think I should be looking for, of course she didn't drive or anything, but if there's anything that I could do to help feel closer to her.
The thing I would suggest is, have you tried meditation, Pam?
No, because I'm always working and on high alert, but no, I should, I guess.
Okay.
I haven't.
I think that, so the idea of communication for me has been, when I'm able to quiet my mind, then it's sort of, there seems to be sort of a, almost a competition, between the soul communicating and the mind jumping in. So I have to get really quiet. There are times when I can't communicate, and I feel like if I get my mind quiet, I'm more receptive and I'm more aware. That's the best thing I can suggest. I'm really very sorry about your loss.
A lot of people go through some severe pain, don't they, Kathleen?
Yes.
I mean, you can feel it.
Yes.
Thanks, Pam, and continue well with you. Next up, we go to David, truck driving in Wyoming. Welcome to the show. Hey, Davey.
Howdy. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing, sir.
I got a couple things, but I think reincarnation seems to be the bigger of the topics. So I want to kind of explain reincarnation, how the Father has taught me how this works. He told us that I know you, Kathleen, I know you're not a Bible scholar, but this is all biblically based on my knowledge, because that's how he's taught me, is out of the King James Version of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
He said the covenant's good for 1,000 generations. You go to Psalm 90, a generation is 70 to 80 years. Then we die, then we fly away. We go back up. We are sent back down as a sentencing, because we are in prison down here in hell, and he sends us to places that we are. Well, in Ezekiel 23, he says, "I will send you to the land of those you hate and despise." So he will send you for however you treated, Matthew 7:12, do unto other men as you would have other men do unto you. This is the law and the prophets. He will send you to a land of the people that you mistreated, done wrong to, so that your soul can learn how it feels to be judged or condemned or to be hated just for being the person that you are. Because we are to follow the steps of Jesus, which is not to judge, not to condemn.
Thank you for that, David. That's a really interesting point. I have heard of this before, because we are learning with each lifetime. So the idea of coming back into a place where we're forced to live through something that we've condemned in the past, so that we have a greater understanding of it, makes sense to me.
And most of the time, Kathleen, when these events occur to people, do they have to be spiritual to accept it, or does it just happen for them?
I don't think so. I saw a medium speaking one time, and he said he was a teacher, and a high school teacher, I believe, something like that. And he said that he had never any notion about the spirit world, but any kind of mediumship or anything like that. And he was sitting with a friend and talking to him, and he suddenly saw this old man sitting next to his friend. And he was a clairvoyant medium, but he had no idea. And he was pretty, freaked out by the experience. And he asked his friend, "Do you know someone who looks like this?" And it was the guy's father or grandfather or something that had passed over. And he didn't have any kind of preconceived notions of that.
What does it mean if somebody's lost a loved one and the loved one has never communicated with them, whether in a dream state or however it happens?
I don't know if it means anything, George. I don't know if it's sometimes I think there are certain people who are more open to it here, that are more tapped in, I guess. But also, I think when we pass over, we're not stagnant. We're continuing to grow. There's another life going on. And so there's certain people that I have not ever heard from. And I don't think it means, something, terrible is, that they're in hell or anything like that. I just think they're doing other things.
Let's go to Chris in San Diego, west of the Rockies. Hi, Chris.
Hi, George. Hi, Kathy. How you doing?
Good to have you with us, Chris.
I'm having a bad week. Kind of it's sort of like this. I met a girl when I was 35. I'm 65 now. She had 2 kids, had an older husband. Her husband died. So I was with the family and fell in love with her. Been with her for about 25 years. it comes COVID time, and we both get the shots, and our son won't get them. He loses his scholarship to San Diego State. He loses his job, and we're still going, you got to get this. She takes the shot. I take it too. Second part of the shot, I get sick. She gets really sick.
Oh, jeez.
It's been a nightmare. And then after that, she's so weak she can't get out of bed. So I finally convinced her to go see a doctor. She was healthy, never had one problem. Healthiest person I know at this age, and just starts falling apart. Well, she had a rash. She went to the rheumatologist, gave her something. She's diagnosed with myositis, which is a rare disease, autoimmune disease, which eats away your muscles. She's already about 6 foot and 5'10". She's 110 pounds. She's skinny by nature, and it just starts eating away her body. And the whole shot of, I have a hard time. I want to know if this disease or what was put upon us was man-made, or was it just by chance that a beautiful woman would get this and just tear the family apart? And I went by the day, and I saw her yesterday. We kind of got into a little fight when she got out of the hospital. She wasn't being that nice to me, and I said, I'm going to take some time off. I call her, George. She won't answer. So I go by her house to give her key back, and her son's there, and he said, she had a trip for the worst. She's back in the hospital.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so I go to the hospital right away. I go in there, and she's about 90 pounds.
Oh.
His eyes are hanging out. She looks like she's dead.
Is she fading, Chris?
Yeah. She does, her muscles won't control her heart anymore. I found out, and that also she has a feeding tube in. So I'm trying to talk to her yesterday. She has an air hood on to breathe with, and she's trying to talk to me. I can't hear things. I can't understand, George. I'm trying to. Is this what you want? So I just started singing Beach Boys song to her. That's all I did for about an hour.
Good for you. Keep her happy. Chris, we're going to take a quick break, Chris, and we'll address the question you just asked when we come back. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, our final segment with Kathleen Dayan, as we'll take your calls. And Kathleen, we were talking to Chris in San Diego about his girlfriend's tragic situation as she seems to be getting worse and worse in a hospital. And I guess his question was, why does this happen to good people?
I don't know. I don't know why things happen the way they do. I guess there is a bigger plan at play. I don't know what that plan is. I don't have access to that. But I'm very sorry that you're going through this, Chris. And I just want to say that is such a loving thing that you did for the woman you love to go to the hospital and sing to her to make her feel better. I think that that's like the kindest thing you can do when you're going through something like this. And I wish I had more answers for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck, Chris, and our prayers are with you. There's another Chris east of the Rockies, Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. Hi, Chris. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, Kathleen. How are you tonight?
Good, Chris. Thank you.
I missed the first part, unfortunately, of the show, so hopefully I'm not too off base here on what I want to talk about. My niece passed away about 2.5 years ago. She was 28. She was like my own daughter, very close to me. And after she passed, I was having a little conversation with God. I don't know if you exist. I don't know what's, out there, but I'm really worried about her because she was so young. And I said, I just wish I knew she was okay. And I was in the restroom, and I was getting ready to take a shower, and across the room we had one of the trash cans that you put your hand over and it lifts up. Mm-hmm. It lifted up and shut. Huh. So I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get anything to do it. I mean, I was throwing little pieces of paper over the top of it. Nothing would make it go off. So it wasn't like it was a battery defect or anything. Not long after that, there was this church that we always, when we were driving from Kansas City to the Lake of the Ozarks, we would always close our eyes and say a prayer every time we went by there. And Tori's been doing this since she was little. She actually one night stopped and played the organ on the way to the lake. It was pretty funny. But anyway, I said kind of the same little spiel. And the church is kind of down in this little dip. It's in the country. And I, said the same thing about God. I don't know if you exist, but I'm so worried about her. I just wish I knew she was okay. And I opened my eyes, and right above the tree line, which wasn't very high up at all. A shooting star shot across the sky.
Wow.
Are those signs?
Of course, I think so. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yes, I'd say absolutely. I think that there's signs from her. You can ask for that. You can ask for, she knows that you're in pain and that you're missing her. And I think she's letting you know that she's doing just fine.
They do give you little signs and signals, don't they?
They do.
I wonder what pushes that, what creates that.
I just feel like they want to be in touch, and they reach out in whichever way they can, to let you know that they're okay, because they want you to be okay.
Absolutely. What would you say for you, for what you're doing as a medium and just with what you're doing, has been the most satisfying aspect of all of this?
The most satisfying aspect of all of it, I think it's just, it's honestly just a quiet wisdom of just understanding a little bit more of my place in the universe, and knowing that I'm on a path that's being supported. I don't question that, and it's given me a really beautiful, quiet life.
Back to the calls. Errol's with us in Denver, Colorado. Hello, Errol. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I had a question about Kathleen's opinion of Ouija boards.
Okay.
I've had that question come up before, and honestly, I have never done that. I can't comment on it. I've heard people say, as that, dark things or something can come through. I can only say, 99% of the communication that I've ever done has been complete love. And the only time that it's been anything other than that, it's just been little quick glimpses of things. I think in the beginning, when I first opened up my third eye, it opened very quickly. I was meditating intensely and, several times a day, and it opened up so quickly that I got kind of like a lump on my head where my third eye is. And, I had a couple things. I saw a shadow person walk by in my room once, and I had a teacher at the time who was a Native American healer, and he said to me, "That's just a shadow person. Just tell them go to the light." And it never happened again. That kind of thing. But I think it's maybe about alignment, and being in a really good headspace when you communicate and coming to the table with, because you could compare the tipping table to a Ouija board easily, but whenever I go to communicate, it's sacred to me. And I always open it with, not a Catholic prayer or anything like that, but my own kind of prayer. I talk to God and to my spirit friends, and I come about it. It's not a game. It's not something that I just want to see if it'll work. It's really something that's very deep in my soul, is just a sacred thing, and I think that's why it always comes through as a form of love. So if people have had experiences with Ouija boards, and I don't know what they brought to the table, or if they are just experimenting with something they don't really know anything about. That's my best guess.
I've never been a fan of the Ouija board. I got to tell you, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Not me. Let's go to Joe in the Bronx. Take it away, Joseph.
Hey, George. How are you?
Okay, Joey. Thanks.
Good. Yeah, George, I'd like to ask if I could give a shout-out to a friend of mine in New York.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Yes, this is to Marion. I'm shouting out to you tonight. She's a frequent listener to Coast AM, and so, yeah, hello. Hello, Marion. Kathleen, Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you too, Joe.
Thank you. My question for you is, how frequently are you surprised or unprepared for spirits to come through in, different environments? How frequently does that happen where it sort of gets you by surprise?
Not very often, because I usually do it with intention. But, going back to my last answer about, when I first really opened up my third eye, it came on so fast that I was seeing things a lot. So, for instance, I would be in a grocery store and suddenly just impressed upon my mind would be just a picture of a person that I didn't know. And I don't know the answer to this, but I think it was someone close to me in the grocery store that had lost this person. So I think it was spirits trying to come through, and that was surprising, that kind of thing. I was surprised in the beginning. I am able to see auras, and I can see them only in certain circumstances. Generally, it's when somebody is standing far enough away from me, and it's not in a bright light. For instance, if I'm in a church, I've had it happen a number of times at funerals. I'll watch the priest, and I'm sitting in the church, and then I can see this like aura coming off of the priest. That was very surprising in the beginning.
Let's go to Lori in Chicago. Welcome to the show. Hello, Lori.
Hey, George. How you doing?
Okay. How are you?
Oh, great. Now that I got through.
Perfect. Go ahead.
That's perfect. I'm coming to the luncheon, too.
Oh, are you? From Chicago.
I'm looking forward to it. I've never booked or paid for a flight before, but for Pat Boone, I'll do it.
You'll love the guy. He's one of a kind.
You got that right. He's been a loved one of mine for 30 years, George.
I love it.
Believe it.
My mother's kind of got a crush on him, too.
Oh, I would say this is not a crush because it's the love described, agape love in 1 Corinthians 13.
That's great. Well, we're going to see you then on Feb 25th.
Yes.
And you're on with Kathleen, so go ahead.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Lori.
I want to give a couple of words of comfort to Christine. Christine, hi, I hope you're still listening. And if you just trust God and tell him, and you won't get confirmation or anything like that, at least I don't think so. Tell her that I love her and I miss her, and that she's a believer in Jesus. I'll just see her later, and I know it. And Kathleen, you remember the same thing too, that if you're a believer in Jesus and you die before I do, I'll see you later.
All right, thanks, Lori. Appreciate you being so candid. And we'll see you at the Pat Boone event coming up on Feb 25th. We do these special events every once in a while, Kathleen. And Pat Boone, the great singer-actor, is going to be one of our guests.
Well, that sounds like fun.
So we're going to continue taking phone calls. Let's talk about your website, which is your name. Can people email you through the website?
Yes, they can.
All right, very good. Let's go next to Mike in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. I work at a historical property where there are spirits abound, but my question is, who would be the spirit that resides in my home, and then also who would be my spirit guide?
Okay, so I can tell you, like, if you want to understand who your spirit guide is, you'd have to do that through, you need to meditate. You'd have to ask for that specific information.
Is it a loved one that's died generally, Kathleen?
Not always, no.
Okay.
It can be, and sometimes we have different guides throughout different parts of our lives. So someone might step aside and let someone else guide, particularly if you have had a loved one who's passed over and they want to take over that role. That can happen. As to the spirits in your home, I don't know a lot about that. It's not something I've pursued. I've had people ask, like, if I could come and speak to, to the spirit in a house that's haunted or something like that. I've never really connected to that. I don't know what it is. I think it's a certain plane of existence that they're staying on, that they're not passing over to. So they aren't really the people that I'm talking to, so I don't know if I can give you an answer.
All right, good luck, Michael. Sabrina, first-time caller, Portland, Oregon. Hello, Sabrina.
Hi, guys.
Good to have you with us. Go ahead.
Sabrina.
I had a question. My sister died last year, and she was a medium, and she was my best friend. And since we were little, we had always been practicing to be telepathic and let me guess what's in your mind, and you guess what I'm thinking about. So when she passed, I could always feel her energy, and she'd always communicate with me instantaneously, whether I knew exactly how she died after she died because her energy was always with me. So a couple of months passed, and she still feels more with me today than she has ever been alive. But sometimes I feel like there's another entity, because I'll ask her questions. I'll say, Nikki, is it this or is it that way? And then I feel like another entity may be coming in and giving me a different answer, and I don't know how to tell the difference sometimes. And I want to know if Kathleen knows how to tell the difference.
How do you distinguish the difference like that, Kathleen?
To me, it's just how it feels, because I have had that happen where someone will come in and it doesn't feel familiar. It doesn't feel, and I just shut down the communication because I really only want to communicate with somebody who is, I always say that's here for my best and highest good, like my friends, my family, my teachers, that kind of thing. You sound so connected to your sister.
Yeah, she does.
I just think that communication is going to continue.
That helps, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. It does. Do you get a lot of comfort from that?
I feel it's kind of like we're symbiotic. We're almost one person now. She's with me in every moment, in every now moment. But I feel like something tries to pretend that it's her, and then I get confused because I don't know if it's that pretending to be her or her. And then she comes in, and then I know she gets upset over it, but then I don't know which one is, because she's my big sister, so she's always really protective of me, so I don't know which one is which.
Only got about 20 seconds left, Kathleen, but how do you distinguish who is who?
You'd have to sit in. I would send out a prayer about it and ask for help with that. Ask your own spirit guide to come in and help decide. Play the role as the gatekeeper and only let her in and not this other entity.
The name of the book is Before We Were Born by Kathleen Dayan. Her spells her last name Dayan. Kathleen, thank you, and stay in touch with us, okay?
Thank you so much, George. I enjoy being on your show.
For Dan Galante, Gina Salvati, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.